Chris, you're actually an Air Force veteran. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Air Force veteran. And I guess you'll be the first one to kind of know, but I'm currently, I do work for the Department of Defense in that realm as an intelligence analyst. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, you'll be the first one to know that. But yeah, that's what I currently do right now.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about how that background sort of ties into your interest in UAP.
So the intelligence part of it doesn't really. I just kind of know how to, use open source information and just gather the information myself and just make an assessment on it. That's kind of what I've just always done with the subject in general. But as far as the Air Force and my military background, I think the biggest aspect for me in this community is being able to, vet information that comes from either veterans or DoD intelligence personnel, like we've been seeing lately, and have a better understanding of what they're talking about versus probably, the average civilian that doesn't have that background and outside of the realm of Google search, right? So that kind of plays in the part of it, but just I don't use anything that I do for work or my profession. None of that. All of this is separate. Just to be clear about that. But yeah, that's kind of what I bring. Just that knowledge, because everybody, all the things that have come out since 2017, it seems to be a big focus on the people coming out all have military or intelligence or some kind of Department of Defense background. So that's where I can kind of just chime in from time to time and help out with that.
So when you say you can bring that knowledge, do you mean sort of the way that they talk about, like, for example, a whistleblower would talk about logistics or something, you can sort of check, or from your own experience, you would know like this or that is credible and that's not, that sort of thing?
Right. Yeah. So, when they come out and they say they go through a certain process, or there's when the 2017 videos came out and there's a classification process behind that. Well, I know a little bit about that. And then like in the turn, with whistleblowers, let's just say specifically Jason Sands, the stuff that he came out and he was saying, I was able to easily, vet some of that information. And then also, it raised a lot of red flags about what he was saying versus what you can disclose when you are supposedly in positions that he is in, especially claiming that you were part of special access programs. Well, there are certain details, obviously, that you're not going to be able to disclose. And he was going into X spaces and just spilling all the beans, right? So and that was another issue. And that's kind of, again, that's what I would bring, is just kind of my knowledge into those processes.
Mm-hmm. And just for clarity, if you can tell us, are you in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations or some other unit?
I don't want to get into specific details, but no, I'm not with OSI. That's a different faction. I'm an intelligence analyst, but because of issues with doxing and stuff in the past, I'd rather not give where I work and the location. But this will suffice for now. Actually, I went through my security officer to make sure that I can at least say that during the interview.
Talk a little bit about Elizondo. So what are like the top 2 or 3 sort of claims that he makes that put him into a very questionable, that make you question what he's saying?
So I guess the first would be the biggest one, where he said he was the director of a government program into investigating UAP, which was called AATIP. So there's been a lot of back and forth, but there's been quite a bit of FOIA documentation to give kind of a better look into the background of those claims. And a lot of that's come from John Greenwald of the Black Vault. And I recently just went through there, just as I figured we were talking about that today. And it's pretty apparent that, he's starting to walk back those claims of being the director of that program, especially recently with Jay Stratton. I think it was either this week or last week. He said that he was the one that that started AATIP, and I believe 2015 is what he said. Well, that contradicts everything that Lou Elizondo has said about the program being it started in 2008, and then there's been discrepancies about that. If it was 2007, 2008, and if he really meant ALSAP, which, you know, AATIP was actually a derivative from ALSAP. But then it seems like there's two versions of AATIP. There is the one that's confirmed by the DOD, and then there's the one that Lou Elizondo claims he ran, which was pretty much an unofficial hobbyist style program, if you want to call it that, from his official position in the Pentagon at the time. And it seems like he was, from the information from, you know, the Black Vault, it seems he was running emails and information through his official email at work, but it was an unofficial it wasn't even a tasking that Elizondo was running. And it seems like he adopted the name of AATIP from ALSAP, which was terminated in 2012. And then he just ran with it in an unofficial capacity. And that's, you know, that came out in 2017, the New York Times article, which was, now we know, is riddled with, you know, kind of misinformation, if you will. There's a lot of information there. It's not correct. That's been corrected over the course of time. So that was probably one of the biggest ones for me, is if you are the director of a said program, you know, you wouldn't be walking back those claims, especially in your book, which has come out recently as well. Another big one with me, and this might be controversial to some people, but as a veteran, it's a big deal. There was a interview that Tom DeLonge did years ago, and Tom DeLonge tells a story that Lou Elizondo told him about his time where he was over in somewhere in Iraq right after 9/11 happened, and that General Mattis saved him while he was in a firefight with, I believe, the Taliban or Al Qaeda or whichever one, and said that General Mattis rode in on a tank and started just blasting everybody and saved his life. Well, for people like me that's been in the military and have read up a little bit about General Mattis, that's not correct. And I'd been blowing that whistle for quite a while, posting that video, asking for Tom or Lou to comment on that video, and they never did, because that just wouldn't happen. You know, the theater command, commander would not be going into a special place like that where there's hostile fire situation and saving just one person. It just wouldn't be happening. He said he did in a t-shirt and with a grenade launcher and all kinds of stuff. Well, in fast forward to Lou Elizondo's book, he took himself out of that equation and tells the same story, and then says that General Mattis saved other people, not him. So that's always been a big thing with me, because to me that sounds like, and we see this all the time in the veteran community, just in the military community in general, are people that exaggerate their claims, exaggerate their service to try to get, you know, popularity or credibility or things of that nature. And that's always been kind of an issue with me. So that was another big claim by him that that nobody's ever commented on, but it's just convenient that after the time, like over a year that I posted that video over and over asking for clarification, the story changes in his book when it matters. So that's another big one for me.
Oh, so is that what you think is the motivation for him making these stories? Is it just to get adulation or respect or something?
Oh, I have those problems too. Trust me, you'll probably hear a cat meow here in a minute. So it's really hard to tell, because out of everybody that's been involved in, say, the AATIP, ALSAP, and UAPTF, other than maybe Travis Taylor, a lot of people have been very quiet on the subject. Lou Elizondo is the only one that really sticks out, that he's very vocal. And I think him being vocal has gone against a seemingly plan in the inner circle, you know, that Stephen Greenstreet has pointed out, and also Dr. Kirkpatrick has pointed out, of these activists. It seems like Elizondo comes out and he speaks a lot more, and it kind of kicks himself in the rear end for doing it, because, you know, Stratton and all of them, it seems like they all had like a timeline built, but unfortunately Elizondo speaking like he does has gone against that timeline, and they've had to walk back statements. I think he likes the spotlight, unlike the others, like Jay Stratton and others involved with let's say UAPTF or OSAP, AATIP, all that. Elizondo's always been the face, as far as I know, since 2017, and that's because he wants that spotlight. He's always wanted that spotlight. There's people in the community that have done a deep dive on his background all the way, before he got into the military. And Elizondo is the type that he might be that guy that exaggerates service and claims just so he can bolster his personality and his credibility. And I think that works against him in the long run. And we've seen that pan out here lately.
So why do you think that the media has been so lacking in discernment when it comes to Elizondo? Because he seems to get interviews everywhere, right? And he's sort of seen as the go-to guy when it comes to UAP issues and the government.
Right. I think a lot of it has to do that it just seems like people don't pay attention to the subject and deep dive into his years and years of claims. Like, say, someone like Greenstreet or Greenwald or McWest, all them guys, they do that, right? They've been in the community so long, they can pull up, hey, I remember when you said this, it doesn't match what you just said. A lot of news media today, especially, is kind of like that copy-paste journalism, where if one story is being reported, they just take the story and they just regurgitate it over and over. And that seems to be what happens. Like, Elizondo, he, for all intent and purposes, he is the face of UFOs as far as everybody knows it since 2017, since New York Times article came out. That's a big backing, right? So it's not a stretch of the imagination that that's where everybody goes to. He's gotten in good with the people that he needs to, that when these issues come up or they're in the news or even the drone flap, they're going to go to Elizondo because supposedly Elizondo is the expert on all this.
Right. And well, you mentioned the drone flap. We'll get onto that in just a second. But are there any supposed whistleblowers apart from Elizondo who you think might have even a modicum of credibility?
It's really hard to say anymore, just to be honest. It seems like the people that come out and claim they're whistleblowers, which we don't have very many, right? They've all been held back and they're anonymous, from David Grush. Some people will always say David Grush, his background, and what he's been portrayed as. For people like me, I did a deep dive into his background, and especially his resume. And it just, coming from a federal government position and military, I see that resume and I immediately see that's written like a federal resume, where you don't lie in your resume, you just exaggerate or your duties, right, that are associated with each position you're in. You make your resume sound as good as you possibly can. And his has been that. And I've gone through that multiple times. But Grush, seems to have some backing from, figures that people deem as being credible, right? So the first, I can't remember his name, but the first Inspector General for the intelligence community, he backed Grush. Now I think he was part of Compass Rose, which was the initial office that represented David Grush's Inspector General ICIG complaint about reprisals. And then it seems like he is no longer with that company, and he went over to Seoul with David Grush, and now neither one of them seem to be on Seoul's website anymore. So I don't know what happened there. But as far as I go, I just don't see anybody being credible as far as what they're whistleblowing about. That gets into my theory of what this leads to. People want to talk about credibility. What's happening is, are these people, and when I say people, the inner circle of these activists, they're targeting resumes instead of evidence to back claims, right? Somebody's credibility in what they do for a living, or their professional history, especially in the DoD, military, intelligence community, that's what they're using to base credibility on, not so much the evidence to back the claims that they have. That's what we've been seeing, and that's what I've been trying to point out. So when it comes to that, that's been, I think, the biggest issue is people have been taught, hey, this guy served, in the intelligence community, worked for the NGA, NRO. They start throwing acronyms out there that most people don't know what these intelligence agencies do. And then all of a sudden, hey, they're credible. These guys, they got to be credible. They're in the know. They have to know what they're talking about. So what they're saying has to be true. That's not the case, especially for me, from what I've seen, my personal experience. A lot of people believe in UFOs. That doesn't mean just because they're a colonel in the military that their experience means it's automatically credible because they're a colonel, right? Because of their resume. It should be about the evidence that they bring forward to back their claims. And we don't get that.
Right. So what do you think is happening then if this is not people just lying, assuming that the so-called whistleblowers are not lying? Is it maybe something along the lines of they think something's going on because like there's some secret aerospace project and then they misreport that, or they think aliens are being hidden, and then it sort of turns into like this positive feedback cycle type thing? Do you think that's plausible?
So yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, honestly. You've got what you've stated there, where there are people that believe that there's a legitimate government cover-up of space alien craft and bodies associated with it's been covered up for 70, 80 years. And then, they're inside the government and they believe these things and they will believe that there's a cover up, ironically, while working for the government. But then you have people that also that lie about it. That I pointed out is my belief that Jason Sands has done recently. Who was the product of James Fox's last documentary, The Program. And I held that space where it turns out Jason Sands is most likely lying about a good portion of the things he claims. And now, on the other hand, his claim to AARO that he was a witness of can be found in the historical report, right? So there was that claim, and it actually was legitimate in the fact that what he heard was a thing during his service, but most likely what they described it as was what he thought he heard was not really what it was. Code names and stuff like that are used by programs to throw off any kind of intel that could leak out. So he heard that, he ran with it, thought that he heard something that wasn't. And that might be what's going on too, that people, they think there's something going on. They might hear something or they see something, a name of a program, and they think, oh, well, this is UFO related, when they don't have access to it. And then so they run with it and they run with those claims. But then you got people that just outright lie. There's people that misidentify things on, just not intentionally. They might have an experience, and they misidentify something. And then next thing you know, they have a UFO claim. I mean, it's a mixed bag, really. It's not just a one size fits all answer. And I believe that's what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think about the New Jersey? If you could just give us like a broad brush picture of what you think New Jersey flap is about.
So, yeah. So, just watching that whole thing unfold, a lot of that is just hysteria that happened online. On the platform X, which is a free speech platform now, not really complaining about that. But unfortunately, what comes with that is a ton of misinformation and a ton of conspiracy theories. From my breakdown, for what I've seen, a lot of this started because, the Langley Air Force Base drone incursion in 2022 or December 2023, it was talked about in Congress. That drew some eyes on the issue. And then we had the Lake and Heath drone incursions that started going all around. People were uploading videos saying, what's this in the sky? And, this, that, and the other. Of course, UFO believers and activists got in on it, tried to say that they weren't drones, it's something else. At the same time that was going on, per the war zone, which is with Kyler Roboway, there was also an incursion, and it was at I think it's called Pickney or something like that in New Jersey, and they had a drone incursion as well. Arsenal in northern New Jersey. They had just 2 days before Lakenheath, they had a small drone incursion go over there. Well, videos started popping up. People either were posting videos of what they thought were drones. There were also videos that were faked that we know were saying were drones. And in news reports, news agencies, local news agencies especially, were literally caught posting videos of commercial airliners saying those were drones. So when you have that kind of those kind of videos and everything going viral and a ton of misinformation, it led to a hysteria online. All these social media influencers that have millions of followers were reposting these things and not vetting them properly. That led to a huge hysteria. On top of the fact that there were probably some people, which is, I mean, you can go and buy a drone anywhere. You can go to Best Buy and buy all kinds of drones off the shelf. There were probably people that were flying some hobbyist drones while that was going on, saying, trying to get videos. That was seen too. But overall, it was a bunch of hysteria. There were people claiming that there were small car-sized drones. Some said bus-sized drones. We never saw any videos of that. It was all just speculation, right? There actually are no videos of that can really be found online from what I've seen. You have that, but then you have the mixture of the actual incursions that were occurring. Case in point, over in Vandenberg Space Force Base, while the Jersey drone thing was going on, there was an actual incident at Vandenberg Space Force Base where they arrested a Chinese national who was flying a drone over that base, recorded images and video of the layout of the base and other things. And when they found the information, they actually caught him trying to board a flight to China, right? And they arrested him. And that was per the Department of Justice. So there are actual incursions that are happening. They could be either, spy, espionage, or they could be they could just be hobbyists flying over, even though they're not supposed to be. Those things are going on. It's been reported that there's, I believe, over 600. There's been 600 drone incursions over bases since I think 2022 per the war zone. So that is happening. But specifically, New Jersey was a lot of hysteria, a lot of misinformation online, especially on X.
You mentioned the Chinese guy who was arrested. So this has been in the news as well. Some political debate about this in Congress about whether China should be allowed to buy land in America, like Chinese companies. And we know that China does a lot of espionage in America, spying, like cyber spying and things like that. Do you think that there should be restrictions on Chinese companies buying land if presumably they can just buy off-the-shelf drones and they might maybe locate their enterprises or their land, kind of get it as near as possible to sensitive American sites. Do you think that more attention should be paid on that?
It wouldn't hurt, right? Especially, even at the Langley incursions, there was a University of Minnesota college student that was, I think he got 6 months prison time. He too was caught flying a drone over a sensitive naval complex over there near Langley. So we do know that there is a Chinese presence as far as espionage goes, and there is enough evidence to suggest that there are Chinese individuals, or I don't know how you would call them, enterprises, companies, whatever, that is buying up land near bases. That would make it accessible for you to fly drone and do any kind of intelligence, surveillance, or reconnaissance in that area over those bases, even if it looks like it's nothing nefarious, right? Just intelligence gathering. Either way, with the tensions rising, it should be paid attention to. Do I know? this is separate from what I do. Do I think that there should be restrictions on it? It just depends. It depends on probably a lot of things. I don't know if they can vet those type of the sales before they do it. But there needs to be red flags drawn. And I think there has been, because the tensions are rising, and there is growing evidence that it seems like, especially with reported police stations also in the country, Chinese police stations, that there's a potential for an infiltration to gather intelligence on our bases that could cause a problem in the future.
Now, but do you think that the sort of the hysteria, like around the New Jersey drone, was that in a big way facilitated by the fact that UFOs are being talked about in Congress now in a more kind of deferential manner? Or do you think that this sort of hysteria would happen on its own accord, given like social media and just like people not being very discerning?
So I think it would have come up regardless because it's happening so often. Like I said, 600 incursions since 2022. So if that's the case, I think it would have been brought up regardless, because these are, Langley is very sensitive base, right? And so is Vandenberg, which we know is tied to SpaceX. So those things would have raised flags in themselves, especially because they're both associated with, Chinese espionage. But then you have the UFO activists that come in who have, some of them have a major, following and have, certain ties to political figures and stuff like that. When they get in and they start influencing and they push their agenda of, well, some of these things, they've got capabilities that are not prosaic, they can't be man-made, blah blah blah, and they're pushing that noise in there, that's definitely gonna muddy the waters as well. So you're seeing people like Coltart, who constantly during the drone thing was posting post of others, and he would always put in quotation marks drones. There was probably at least three, maybe four posts he did that on where he didn't vet them, and he had to delete those posts because it was either Starlink, which the Starlink satellites. One was a radio antenna that people were saying was off in the mountain and had lights. It was a UFO, and he even posted that as well. He deleted that once it was pointed out that wasn't the case. So you have those people who have ties to political figures who are put her in their ears, and that's kind of a problem, right? As there could be infiltration issues in the country as far as drones. We don't need unrealistic players with kind of like a propaganda or push an agenda in the ears of Congress that are writing policies. There's real threats that we're about to face, especially with a new administration coming in. I imagine things are going to get a little more tense, at least at first. And I just don't think UAPs are top of the list. And I think the Department of Defense, they feel the same way. But the congressional hearings and things of that nature have definitely drawn more eyes to think that, hey, there's more to this than just drones. And that's what we're seeing.
So what is your own view on UFOs, actually? Like, I guess you wouldn't discard the possibility that there could be ETs coming here, but it's not necessarily like you don't think that that's the best explanation, right?
So I have a personal view. A lot of people don't ever hear it, but I had two experiences myself. That one, I think I explained, that happened when I was a teenager. I think I figured it out by now, but there was multiple people in my school. It was after class that we saw something that we could not explain, to the point that it startled all of us, that we all went home. Some of us had parents come pick us up. We couldn't figure out what it was, but we saw it, and it was close. So do I think the potential for life outside this planet exists? I think it's not only, I think it's probable. It's statistically probable. Do I think that they're coming through and just stopping in at our bases just to kind of observe, and, they're only, they're coming here and we're shooting them down and we got their bodies hidden somewhere, and these people say they know all this information? No. I think most of them, they either really believe in this thing and they kind of LARP that they're insiders and they have all this insider information to try to, persuade the public that they are more than what they are. But then I do think that some people truly believe it. And they're just trying to find answers. Either way, I don't think the people that want disclosure, I don't think they're going to get it from the government, because I don't think the government has anything to do with it. If there was a major discovery, I think they would trust in us enough to say, look, we found this thing and we want to break this news. We want to get it to the people. I just don't think there's a cover up. And that's my biggest, especially the people that LARP as insiders and they say anonymous sources. I think it's all just a charade. It's just a popularity thing.
Well, those people who, like, you try to explain things to them, why you don't think certain whistleblowers are credible, etc. But you always hear like excuses or evasions. What are some of the more typical excuses that you hear?
Well, I can't talk about that because it's classified. Or, yeah, I have a clearance, so I can't say this, I can't say that. Those seem to be the biggest thing. That was full display during Rush's congressional testimony, right? All the tough questions seem to be, I can't talk about this in this setting, Oh, and don't get me wrong, protecting national security, we need that, right? We definitely need that. But it seems to be a trend that all of these so-called insiders or even whistleblowers, at least the ones that we know of, all have this information, yet they gatekeep it. And they don't bring it out. Well, it leads one to believe that it's either something that's coached, telling them that don't bring the information out, and then they start doing podcasts. They hide behind, I can't talk about that because of my clearance, or because it's classified. But they go on these podcasts, they go on, they write books, they do all of these things, they go on the news and they do news segments. Like, it's just a boost in popularity. But I think some of it also has to do with funding. I think they're these same group of core people are trying to get funding to start another ALSAP AATIP, which AATIP was just a nickname for ALSAP, but I think that's what's going on. And we can dive into it if you want, but I really think Americans Against Safe Aerospace, or Americans for Safe Aerospace, I really think that that's just a Trojan horse for those same core group of people trying to get insider information on UFO reports. And that's, if you look at the board, and I posted this, a few minutes before we came on, it has all the same characters on that board, including Jay Stratton, Christopher Mellon. All of those same people are on there. And I think that there's a push for another ALSAP style program, potentially to backdoor AARO, because none of them trust AARO.
Right. This sort of Trojan horse AATIP you speak of, the people in it, they're motivated by, I guess they're true believers, right? And would you say that they're motivated more by a commitment to the ET hypothesis, or like interdimensional or some paranormal type thing? Because there was a lot of that in AATIP, wasn't there?
ALSAP, yes, there was. Yeah. So ALSAP had, they had their security out there on Skinwalker Ranch doing, paranormal investigations and doing like telepathy and stuff like that, those type of tests. And one person that has brought that to light was Chris Bartell, because he was working for Bass during that time. But there was also an interest in UFOs, and I really think that that's what happened. They were trying to push for a UFO program, and they wanted a special access program. I guess labels and accesses, and they couldn't get it. It was shut down. And I think that they just continued on. That's what Lou Elizondo ended up running. But UAPTF was in there. They did their job. That was an actual DoD program. We know that that's true because they just received an intelligence award. So they did do some work in the time that they were in. But yeah, I really do think that that's what's going on. Is you got people that were involved in those type of programs in the past. They're trying to get back in and gain access again.
So what do you think is the most fruitful way to study UAP? If you could set up your own research program or, dedicated unit, what would it do? How would it approach this problem?
Well, a lot of people don't like this, probably won't like this explanation, but you have to run it kind of like how AARO does. AARO's got individuals from all backgrounds, and you want to basically approach it from a scientific perspective. That's why you saw Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who was also, he's not only did he work in intelligence, but he was a scientist, right? He has that background, and he's worked with different intelligence agencies on different projects, especially on the science back end of it. So, you want those type of people, even like the current director, that have the science background, but also can work with the classification processes, and the material, and they have that access to that style of information, despite what people claim. They've had that access. So you want to get people from different aspects, like they have done, bring them in and have them analyze these reports. But apparently these reports have really started to jump off. There are quite a few reports that come in based on AARO's latest figures. So obviously you're never going to be manned to get through all of them. And of course you're going to meet criticism through that. But I think the way that they're trying to approach it, that Dr. Kirkpatrick has set up initially, was the way that you could do it, right? Just bring in people from different backgrounds who can contribute to different parts of analysis of said incidents, and then try to make a determination from there.
Mm-hmm. Getting back to Elizondo's book, though, I think he mentions in it that there was some resistance to investigating UFOs because of a religious, sort of a conservative evangelical or Christian resistance to UFOs, because they were seen as demonic, which I know is a belief among some Christians. But do you think that's a plausible reason why people within the DoD would not be interested in UFOs?
Well, so there is an aspect of religion or God that would play into it, right? I mean, we've heard Representative Burleson talk about angels and demons when he came into the UAP topic. So you're going to have people from certain styles and backgrounds, especially in the South, where religion's huge, Christianity. You're going to have people that have their determination of what a UAP or what alien life would be. There's a guy named Chris Bledsoe that puts out a lot of stuff I'm very skeptical of, but his big claim to it is it's like angelic, angels, demons type of activity instead of so much aliens. So there are people that are going to have that belief. Do I think that that's a cause for why he received the pushback? I don't think so. The Department of Defense came out and stated in replies in FOIAs that it wasn't a priority for them. To me, it sounded like they didn't see enough evidence to suggest that it was something that was, anything more than prosaic, just stuff in the sky that, might look anomalous at first, but that's just the appearance of them either on images or video without further investigation into it. Might be a lack of data, right? The low information zone or Liz, like McWest talks about. So I don't think it was so much a pushback on that. While I do think people hold those beliefs, I don't think that that's a hurdle that he encountered, so much so as, just people that wasn't a priority in the Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that on Capitol Hill, the UFO push is more of a Democratic thing or a Republican thing, or is it a mix on average?
So I think it's a mix, but there's one thing I'm starting to notice, and I don't like it at all. At least from my standpoint, I was born and raised in Tennessee. It's where I live currently. And by nature, I've always had conservative values, right? I think that you're starting to see, like Tim Burchett's conservative. I think Burleson's conservative, but I also see other people on the other side of the aisle as well. It's mixed, but I'm seeing a rise in conspiracy theories on the conservative side. It's mainly, especially the extreme conservatives in that movement. Conspiracy theories are what's in right now. That's what sells. That's why you see a lot of misinformation online, because that's what people engage with, and that stuff goes viral real quick. And on the conservative side, especially, they don't, right now, there's no trust in the government. So you're seeing that bleed into UFOs as well, because the main push about the UFO narrative is, hey, the government's been covering up, evidence of aliens in space and wrecked craft since the 40s. And so that feeds into the whole conspiracy theory narrative. And that's why you're starting to see people kind of dive into it, right? You've seen like Sean Ryan had, Dr. Stephen Greer on there, right? People are diving into that because that's popular right now. So that's kind of my take on it. But I do think, as far as Congress goes, it seems like it's a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Now, you said that if the government did have in its possession like a UFO, they would tell us. But isn't there an argument to be made that because of the propulsion system to get to Earth, it would be of such a sort of exotic nature that they would know that Russia and China would be very worried about American possession of that technology, because we could repurpose that for weapons, delivery systems, and such. Do you think that that would sort of put a block on revealing that to the public?
So that's been the main argument for decades now, is we're reverse engineering alien technology for our personal gain. The problem I have with that is if that's what we're doing, and we know the military industrial complex, like, it is a very big business, and they are constantly evolving and advancing tech for use by the DoD. I would assume that the conflicts that we've been in all these decades, we would have seen reminiscent this technology in some of these conflicts. And to me, I don't see anything in any of the wars or conflicts that have happened or currently are happening to suggest that we have that kind of technology, right? So, and if that was the case, recently it's been put out there that, China has advanced their tech and, has come close to be a near peer for us as far as technology goes. If that's the case, then China would have had the same access, or how would they have caught up so quickly? There's just nothing to suggest in my eyes that we have that kind of technology. And if we did, why would we not use them immediately in, say, the Ukraine-Russian war, right? That thing, it's been going on, 3 years now? And what we've seen more of is just drone, the use of drone technology in the battlefield, the battle space, more than we ever have. So if we had the technology, where's it at? Why have we not used it? What are we saving it for if we had it? A lot of that stuff just doesn't make sense to me, but it is probably the number one notion that pushes this UFO conspiracy with the government for since the 40s.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, my other question actually was tying into China and Russia. So do you see any kind of sincere interest by them in UAP, or do you think they would just be tempted to use the topic to sort of muddy the waters in America?
To be honest, it could be seen as an advantage to them. The more that we draw a focus on UAP in America, meanwhile, China has just been advancing their tech, and they've not been claiming any kind of UAP technology. Apparently it's only ever happened in the US, right? We're the ones that have only happened to have crash retrieval programs and gotten it. Now there's speculation and stuff that, activists have put out there saying that other countries have had, crashes too, and they could be the ones to beat us to disclosure, which also kind of sounds like the space race all over again. right? The first one to get to the moon. Well, the first one to reveal who has the technology from outside of this world. To me, I think the United States could use, and maybe that's what they're doing. The government's using all of this muddied propaganda with the UAP hearings and everything as a cover for what we're trying to do, and it draws the attention off of our actual technology. But at the same time, I think China is kind of sitting back thinking, hey, while they're chasing their tails looking for aliens, we've got real, advancements going on over here over the past decade or so, and they're catching up to us. And I think that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that UFOs, the way that the whistleblowers, the so-called whistleblowers, are talking about UFOs, like in the hearings and so on, the tropes that they bring forward, they seem to be sort of just recycled or boilerplate items, right? Is there anything genuinely novel that you've seen come out of them?
Honestly, no. My biggest thing has been the lack of evidence. And a lot of people go with the notion, well, David Grush and these whistleblowers have given, evidence in a classified setting. Well, if you read the historical report from AARO, that hasn't been the case. There still is nothing to suggest that anything is not from this planet. It's all been prosaic misidentifications or just misinterpreting what they've heard as far as what a special access program is titled and what could be in it. To me, it's just, I think that as far as the UFOs go, it's just they're using it as kind of a crutch, I guess. And it's just there's been no true evidence of anything. You may make the argument of the gimbal video. People still debate the gimbal video. To me, I think Mick West has done a good job, and even NASA confirmed, with the Go Fast video, it's a balloon. Give that one up, even though Ron Graves doesn't want to. The FLIR video, it's the camera going in and out, the sensor trying to lock in, and it escaped the sensor when it tried to zoom in too far, and it looked like it zipped off, but that's really what it lost lock when it zoomed in too far, and it looked like it darted off. I have never seen anything that I've just sat there and be like, all right, well, that can't be explained, especially on Jeremy Corbell's weaponized podcast drops, which that's a whole different story. There's a story there that I think will eventually come out about how he's accessing those videos. But still, nothing I've seen from those would suggest anything from outside of this world. So I just don't think there's anything out there to suggest that there's actual non-human intelligence that are flying any craft.
Right. Do you think that the UFO sort of mythos has become more sinister and dark, or is there still like a significant component of it which is kind of harks back a little bit to the, I guess you could say, the contactees in the 50s, right? More of a hopeful image or message, I should say. Like, which one do you think predominates these days?
Oh, so 100% like a darker image. You're seeing a threat narrative, right? That's what's been put out there by activists in the core believer group, that they're painting it to be more of a threat in our airspace than they are something positive. And the reason you would do that is because you want to raise the attention of Congress and the government. Because if you say it's a threat, then that raises alarm bells, and that grabs attention a lot quicker than saying, well, these could be peaceful beings that are just flying around, and shouldn't be too big of an issue. We're just letting you know it's out there, versus a threat where, hey, every time something goes in the air that's carrying civilians or any kind of human life, it's constantly threatened by what's in our skies right now. We should take this serious. So it kind of has more of a darker connotation to it than in the past, where it was more so just, it was experiencers giving their experience, and it was always a mixed bag. You had abductees, that goes either way, but there are experiencers that say They could be good. They could be coming here to save us, save humanity from like nuclear, issues or whatever the case may be. Right now, it's definitely the threat narrative that's taken hold.
And that threat narrative, do you think it's a reflection of like social tensions and concerns, like illegal immigration or terrorism and things of that sort?
Well, those things can be portrayed to be part of it. Honestly, my assessment would be the reason why they're pushing the threat narrative is because that's how you get the attention from the people that hold taxpayers' money and fund programs. And if you can say there's a threat, that means that now you've created a need. And if you're a company that can address those needs, well, they'll come to you and say, all right, we'll give you this much money and this access to investigate these things that we see as threats. And I really think that's why you're seeing certain individuals in the community push a threat narrative, because it will lead to funding, it will lead to accesses, and then you're going to have that core group of believers now have inside to government or even civilian, airliner UFO reports.
But if these people who want to be insiders, they genuinely believe that we're being visited by otherworldly entities, wouldn't they realize that like pushing a threat narrative is potentially very dangerous if like the whole posture is defensive and we're seeing them as hostile, these creatures or whatever? Like, wouldn't they, logically connect that this would be like potentially starting a war with another race of beings, something like that?
So it's very interesting, right? But the premise behind it is, if you're going to allocate manpower and time to investigate properly, then you got to have the funding to do it. And I imagine that once they would have the access, then you're going to see core beliefs of what they think it could be start to come out more, right? So let's create a threat narrative, but once we gain access, let's say, well, you're going to see other belief styles start to bleed out, in my opinion, because there are people that think, like we just discussed, that do think it's a positive presence, that think that they're here for all sorts of reasons. And those people, they've made those statements publicly, but they know that right now there are things, since the Chinese spy balloon incident, we now know that there's not 100% accountability of everything that floats around in our airspace, and they could take advantage of that. And that is one way to do that. Now, once they get in, once they get funded, then it's kind of, hey, let's just take it. Now it's investigative mode. It's more like paranormal investigating. And then they try to say, okay, well, they're here. Let's discuss why they're here, right? Then that positive aspect can bleed in. So that's kind of how I see it. That's how it would unroll.
And seen as like the default arena in which people want to sort of get inside of. Like, couldn't these people ask like billionaires for money, something like that, or some public institute which could dedicate itself to UFOs? Why is it always the government that's like the holy grail?
Well, because the spending, right? Government spending. We know that there's unfortunately issues with government spending in the past, especially in the military industrial complex. There's a lot of spending. So what way to get some of that spending than to go with that narrative? But you see foundations like the Soul Foundation, and that's what they're doing. They are looking for investors. They're looking for people to buy into the research they're trying to do. We know that because there's video that has popped up of David Grush out there lobbying to investors on probably Soul's behalf to try to get that money. We saw Gary Nolan it was a conference, I forgot what it was called, but it was, entrepreneurs and investors were all there, and he was out there, basically selling Soul and selling the idea of Soul, so investors will come in with money and say, hey, I believe in what you're doing. Here, I'll give you this amount of money. and so that's what you're seeing as well, right? Seoul is doing that, and there's evidence here lately to support that they might be actually pushing away from certain whistleblowers and certain kind of ideas and personalities to try to narrow their scope and their credibility for those investors to come in and take them seriously.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the role of AI? Like, do you think it's an appropriate or suitable, technology to use, or what are the dangers or pitfalls in that?
Unfortunately, AI, there's big pros and cons to it. I'm not a big proponent of it. I'm still starting to learn about it myself. But we're seeing that, AI is getting so good with what are called deep fakes that, I mean, it's going to get to a point where videos are going to come out that are going to look so legitimate that it's going to be a hard time trying to discern, like, what is this real or is this not, right? And that's a problem. And then of course, AI can be used for good things, for, collecting data and information and trying to filter that. So I don't know how much it'll play into it, as I'm just admittedly, I'm still kind of ignorant to AI and the capabilities and how they would be used in this context. But I can see a pro side and definitely a con side to it.
You mentioned in a previous, I think it was on Steve Camby, and you were mentioning that somebody was talking about like the NRO in the context of, I think it was Grush or somebody. Or remind me what that was, if you can remember. It was the NRO was supposedly brought in to ask like questions some guy about his sighting, but like they would have had nothing to do with that because they just deal with satellites. And so can you tell us a bit about sort of that type of problem where people don't understand what intelligence agencies do?
More than likely, it was either, according to his resume and when he was with UAPTF, is either with the NRO or the NGA. And oftentimes there's the claims that Grush brought people in to skiffs to collect information about whatever it was they were whistleblowing on. And the problem with that is I find it highly unlikely that the companies, that the agencies he would have been working for, either the NRO or the NGA, would have, if those UAP, the UAP task force was not an official duty for those agencies, most likely, and it was an additional duty, then I don't see them giving skiff access for people to come in so that Grush can interview them for that type of disclosure or whistleblowing. And then the video came out recently, even after the Cambion thing, where Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff admit that they're the ones that put Grush onto the information for the whistleblowers. Like, they're the ones that put out that information and gave it to Grush, and that led Grush down to the path of whistleblowers. So chances are that the information wasn't classified to begin with if they're giving it to each other like that, which I'm pretty sure. I don't know if Eric Davis still has a clearance, but I don't think Puthoff would anymore. And it's a very, very good possibility that not even Grush has a clearance anymore. So I just don't see those specific agencies using their facilities to bring in UFO whistleblowers for an additional duty that was not associated with that agency, if that makes sense.
Right. I don't know if you want to talk about this, but you're probably somewhat familiar, at least, with the Paul Benowitz affair
With Richard Doty?
Richard Doty, yeah, and all those shenanigans which he supposedly was involved in. First of all, do you credit that story, or do you think we should just take anything that Doty says with a grain of salt? And also, is there much evidence for intelligence community sort of involvement in UFO, the topic, as a counterintelligence type of tool?
So it could definitely be used as counterintelligence. The problem is now that the UFO lore is so ingrained to just everyday society, right? We've grown up with sci-fi movies and things like Independence Day and all these movies that associate aliens. I don't think that the government nor do intelligence agencies really need to invest much more in pushing a narrative of aliens as far as counterintelligence goes. I just, to be honest, and I've said this many times, the public psyops themselves, and the government really doesn't have to do much for it. And the case for that would have been drones. We saw what happened with the drones. It was a huge, we psyoped ourselves, right? And that right there is evidence enough that I just don't think that that's what's going on when people say, well, we're being psyoped. Why? The government doesn't have to do anything. The best thing the government can do in form of a psyop and counterintelligence is just let the UAP narrative keep going. Let these people keep getting in front of Congress. All it does is keep the attention off of them and what they're trying to do behind closed doors that has nothing to do with aliens, but definitely advancing our tech, which we're always doing, right? As far as Richard Doty, I've called out Richard Doty. You know, I haven't had much exposure to him, but in the exposure I've had, especially on X, I've called him out for several things that I know that he's lied about. Like, for instance, he said that everybody with a security clearance, you can find an online database that you can just look up people and see if they have a security clearance. That's not true, because if that was true, then the adversaries, other countries would be able to access that same database, find out everybody that has a clearance and target those individuals. That is not a thing, right? So Richard Doty has been apparently plenty of times caught in several lies. As far as the Benowitz thing, I saw Mirage Men, and I don't know what to take from that as far as how much he had to do with that. Everything that he says, like you said, it shouldn't be with a grain of salt. It should be a whole block of salt, because I just don't see that person being credible. But people still host him and believe the things that he says, because he can just rattle them off like it's fact, because he's so good at lying and deceiving, right? And I think that kind of plays into a little bit of what Jason Sands does now. Is he's so quick to rattle off information that's not true. People perceive that as him telling the truth, and I just don't see that to be the case.
Well, since we're talking about some of the classics in UFO mythology, what do you think of the Bob Lazar story? Like, can you give anything from your perspective which might add to this whole, saga?
So I learned more about Bob Lazar when I came on to this platform on X that I did beforehand. Bob Lazar's story has always been intriguing, and Bob Lazar's name is arguably the household name when it comes to UFOs, even more so than Elizondo. And that's because just the constant, you've seen Lazar on Joe Rogan, which that helps tremendously, right? We know George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell both rode Lazar's coattails to the fame that they have now. Both of them did the same thing, pushing Lazar's stories. And then next thing you know, you see them, Knapp used it to get, gain a lot of attention when he was a reporter. You saw Corbell do that when he was able to get on Joe Rogan, and all of a sudden now everybody knows who Jeremy Corbell is. As far as Lazar's story, I think it was Dr. Dean Johnson, I believe, who's on X. He's got an incredible thread breakdown of Lazar's actual history that's been located. I just don't believe, as somebody that's held a clearance and actively does, I don't see how somebody who has the history Lazar had, ever maintaining or even gaining a security clearance, much less going into hangars at Area 51 or wherever and touching, spacecraft from another world. It's very far-fetched. I think even Christopher Mellon at one point on Joe Rogan stated that Bob Lazar's history, and especially his background, is not credible. To say that you had a degree from MIT, but nobody can find records of it, well, it's easy to hide behind the notion that the government deleted your education background. that's a conspiracy theory right there that people are going to run with, because that's something that you can't disprove, right? People have found that you can't find any of his diplomas or anything online. But when you say, well, the government deleted it, or, you know, that's why you can't find it anymore. Well, how do you disprove that? You can't. And it's a good hide behind. So there's other factors into his history. He wasn't exactly who he said he was. I think he was he worked for like a contracted electrical company of some kind, and that's how he was gaining access to that area. He was not a physicist, and there's just been a lot come out. You know, something about he was he was in charge of a brothel at one point, and he was charged for that. Like, you know, he married a woman that was convicted, I think, of murder or something along those lines, who was a convicted felon. Those are all major red flags that you will never get a security clearance, especially one at as high as he claims. So do I think Lazar is legitimate? Absolutely not. It's a cool story, though. Cool story. I will say that.
Yeah. I used to believe it when I was a teenager, but
Yep.
see, I got more wise after that.
Yeah. Well, you got to think too, when the Lazar story came out, we didn't have the access to information like we do now, right? The amount of data and information we have at our fingertips is so much easier to look in the background of people than it was 30, 40 years ago. Yeah, 50 years ago, right? So that was another reason why Lazar's story was able to go so long without, you know, proper vetting.
Yes, exactly. Now, these UFO stories, they sometimes converge into a common narrative, and sometimes they fragment because, like, the people don't like each other for various reasons. Do you see, what do you sort of, maybe not anticipate, but if the Elizondo story does collapse, how do you think it might come to that conclusion?
Well, to some, especially people like me, I think it's already collapsed. He's gone back on the whole director of a program so many times. I think what you're going to start seeing is, whether you believe AATIP was a thing, ALSAP did this, UAPTF did this, what you're seeing now is, it looked like the inner workings and the infrastructure of these organizations was so sloppy. You're seeing people come out and say things that contradict each other, and they all work together. So how does the information that you put out when you're working with these people in the past contradict what they say, and it goes back and forth? Case in point, the ever-growing saga of Jay Stratton and Elizondo. Like, who ran AATIP? Was it Elizondo? Was it Stratton? Like, it's constant contradictions. And what that tells me is, whatever you guys were doing in that whole group, it was very sloppy. It was not structured correctly, and it was no wonder it failed in just a couple of years. So, you know, you're going to start seeing them kind of eat each other, keep going back and forth. But what my prediction of this year is, you're going to see more people that were either affiliated with UAPTF come out, which we've seen here lately, like this Logan individual who was associated with UAPTF, Sarah Gam associated with UAPTF. Whatever capacity it was, they were all still associated. You're going to see more and more people start to come out from there, and then you're going to see whistleblowers start to come forward, because after that last congressional hearing with Elizondo, it fell flat, right? We know that, Anna Paulina, she was quoted by Matt Laszlo. You can hear the recording where she said, you know, it'd been nice to get more answers and less, promoting your book, right? She quoted saying, it's a waste of our time. That's what, when you're on the pinnacle and you're on the floor and you've been fighting for years to get information out, and then when you're on the stage and you fail to deliver, that's where it's all going to come downhill. And you're going to see whistleblowers are going to have to start coming out publicly, because the idea that was formed to bring these whistleblowers together as a group and push them forward to the intelligence community, the ICIG and everything like that, it's all starting to falter. And you're going to see that. And that's what's going to keep happening. I think it's going to all end up crumbling unless something like Seoul or Americans for Safe Aerospace actually gets that access inside. If it doesn't, you're going to start to see this stuff kind of start going downhill.
Interesting. And so do you want to, I think that's all the questions I had. Did you want to say anything more about your own ideas or where people can find you?
Well, right now it's just X. I have been talking with someone. I'm going to kind of keep it close to the chest right now. We're thinking about starting a podcast potentially, and it's going to be more scientific based and bringing in credible people to talk about their scientific backgrounds and try to get information out there, and every now and then see how that relates to the UAP topic and see if we can get some answers that way. It's kind of the idea. We're gonna kind of hopefully dive into it here. Yeah, it's, the holiday season obviously there's you can't really commit to much during the holiday season. So this year we're gonna look to start that. But as far as that goes, I think you can just find me on X. And you can follow me there. And I try to do the best I can because I've always been interested in this subject. And I tell people all the time, I believe that something's out there, but I don't think that the people that are claiming to have the access and the knowledge and the evidence and they're gatekeeping it, I don't think they're being honest to the people in the community. And I point out those red flags. And all I'm doing is trying to find my own truth. And I just go where the information takes me. That's all I can do. So
good advice. Well, Chris, thank you very much. And I hope we can continue this discussion.
Like I said, I'm kind of all in this thing, whether, people like the information I put out or not. In the community, it's very hard to sell when you're opposing the overall narrative of what people believe in. But I only just do it for my personal interests. I just get facts out there. If I wanted to be a social media influencer, which I delved into the whole TikTok thing, that's where I initially got my following. If I wanted to do that, I could definitely be pro disclosure and I would get a bigger following. I only care about what the truth is. And I just put that out there and put my assessment along with it.
Yep. Thank you for your integrity. And oh, by the way, there's also I mentioned the Cambian interview, but you've done a few of those, and I think maybe on other channels as well. So maybe you can make a playlist, and I can share that.
Okay.
Of your interviews. That might be helpful for viewers.
Yeah, I could try to put that together. I'm actually going to be filming one tonight on another platform. So once that gets out, I'll definitely put that out there as well. So anything I do from here on out, I'll definitely let you know, and I'll try to put those things out there more often where people can find me.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.